Hello there. So I've been getting back into Unity in a pretty big way. I have a few Unity videos on my YouTube profile, but uh, I've recently just sort of been getting back into it, and I thought it would be really fun to make a few videos, just start sort of a front to back tutorial of some cool things you can do with Unity, geared mostly towards um, just designers who want to put a little bit of code in their game, but also for other programmers who may be using Unity for the first time and they, don't necessarily know your way around very well, and like I was, and I still am to some degree. Um, but just getting familiar with those different things, and each tutorial is going to be kind of okay. Let's come up with something really quickly and do it, and write the code to get that going. And hopefully over time, you can develop, extend that stuff, develop little, additional uh, snippets of code, and you know, essentially have a library after a while of doing this, where maybe you're not writing so much new code, you're just going in and playing with what you have and trying to get little game ideas um, set up. So, anyways, we'll start with a new project. I have one open, the example Unity demo. If you've never used Unity before, I would recommend going to the website, downloading the software. This version is the 3.5 developer beta for Flash, but they all look pretty much the same to me. And this also builds for PC and Mac, so it shouldn't look any different than what you've got. And maybe get familiar with some of the very basic controls and making objects in the scene and stuff like that. Not very hard to do, and definitely necessary for following along these tutorials. Though I'll try to point out anything that might be not entirely obvious. So anyway, each video is going to be about under 10 minutes or so, and they're all going to be very snippet sized. Here's how to do this kind of stuff. And so in this one, we're going to create a game object and just talk to it in code, get it doing something. And I'll try to point out really cool things as we go. So the first thing we're going to do is create a game object. I like to start with a plane, so that way I can have something going on, and I can differentiate between the blue in the background and objects in my scene. So I've got a plane, and I'll also create a cube. There we go. So that cube's kind of hard to see if you look in the other viewport, so the last thing I'll do is get a light in here. Probably a point light is the best one to use when you're just trying to see what's going on. So, okay. That all looks about right. And for this one, this first tutorial, we're just going to take the cube, and we're going to make a special script for it. I'm going to be writing the code in UnityScript, which is kind of like a JavaScript variant. But if you want to do code in Boo or C#, I mean, frankly, if you're using those languages, you're probably already familiar with them, especially Boo, which seems strangely, I don't know, just seems like something you would know if you if you started doing this. But UnityScript is sort of like Unity's de facto standard, and it's what a lot of their examples are documented in. So that's what we're going to stick with. So let's go ahead and create a new script. I'm going to pick JavaScript, and it comes up with new behavior script. Let's give it something like, move my object. And then in the far right, you can kind of see the code that's generated for you. I'll try to go over every little thing that they have in here. And let's double click it and open up the script. Okay, here we are. So JavaScript is, or Unity rather, is going to generate these two functions for us to start with. If you're not familiar with functions, the easiest way to get really familiar with them is think about algebra and f of x equals y and that kind of thing. It's generally a similar idea, but that's the easiest sort of analogy I can give. But basically they're just snippets of code that we use to do something. So if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, the general idea is that with code you're trying to model objects. In this case, I'm trying to model a cube and also have it do something. So the two things I need are some pieces of data that represent things that the cube may need or want to do, and then my functions or methods which decide how it's going to do those things. So with Unity you can expose what are called variables in the editor, and I'm going to do that right now. I've decided I want this cube to move, but I haven't told it by how quickly. So I'm going to create a new variable called we'll call cube speed, and we'll make it a floating point variable. And what this does is it allows us from the editor, once we've dropped this script on top of our object that we want it to be applied to, it's going to allow us to edit that without having to go into the code. It's very convenient. And in the we can also set default values. So if I say equals 4, that's going to be a default value for us. So if we don't specify anything, it'll be 4. If we do specify something, then it will take on whatever that value is. The next function we're not going to worry about too much right now. It's a start function. If you're familiar with coding terms, it's sort of like a constructor for the object. And it will run when your object is instantiated, or basically if your object is sitting in the scene, it's going to run that function first the second the game starts. The next one is the update function. This is used so that essentially every frame in your game something is going to be theoretically happening. Indeed, in this particular script, in this little mini game we're doing, we're going to want to tell our object to move, to do something, and we'll be telling it to do that here in the update. So every object in Unity is a game object, and game objects have certain properties and things that are already associated to them without you even necessarily knowing about them. And that's kind of tricky, because you say basically, well, what can my game object do and what can it not do? For that, the only thing I can really say is, as you start coding, you're going to pick up a lot of the things that a game object will have associated with them, and then you're going to be able to differentiate those from the things a game object does not necessarily already have when the start of the game occurs. So right now we are going to talk to something it does have called a transform. So we're going to write out that transform, and then we're going to use the dot operator. And if you hit the dot operator, it will show you all the different things that this object's transform, which is sort of a way of storing rotation and position data, among other things, has. And right now we want to find a function, and we can write it out, but I'd like to find it in here first. Let's see. Here it is. Translate. Actually, you know what? Let's just do a rotation. Here we go. Rotate. So if you hit the rotate, then you're calling this function now on this particular object's transform. We don't know what object it is. That'll be decided once the game starts. So in typical function syntax, we need to pass it something. And in this case, it wants essentially a vector that it can rotate around. Now, if you haven't done math for a while, or you're a little, unsure of what a vector is, you can kind of think of it as a sort of a line in space or something like that. But it's really just has a position, or excuse me, it has a direction and a magnitude, but does not have any necessary position in space. So we'll give it a vector 3, and a vector 3 has 3 components, an x, y, and z component. It looks like, if I look in the right here, looks like y is going that way, and I kind of want it to rotate around the y-axis. So I'm going to set 0, 1 for the y, and 0 for the z. And then also I kind of want to multiply this vector by my speed. my cube speed that I set. And finally, something that's important to keep the sort of the update function working properly is to let this particular function know how much time has passed since the last time update was called. That's provided for you in time.deltaTime. If you've ever done any programming before, like an XNA or something, you're probably familiar with the concept of keeping track of time and how important it can be in your game. But in this case, we're just sort of multiplying all these things together. And in theory, if we save this, and I will, we can now drag it onto our object. And so the process of that, if I click on my cube, I'll see it here. I'll also see it with its default value that we exposed in the editor. I'll change that to 5 just to show that we can. And now, when this talks to a transform, it's not just talking about any transform, it's talking about our cube's transform, because we could apply this script to any object in our scene. And we'll hit the play button, and there you go. You can see the cube sort of rotating around that axis that we specified. Pretty slowly though, so let's make the cube speed a little faster. I don't know, let's give it 18 and hit play again. That's much better. So we can see it happening in the scene, and we can also see it happening in the game if we take our main camera in our scene. Actually, I can do the game object align with view, pull it closer. That will, of course, be set back to its original position if I hit play again, because Unity doesn't like to remember things that you're doing when you're sort of debugging. It only wants to remember things that you've done in between those steps. So, okay. First script, really easy. You've probably done this a million times, but it's important to get a feel for sort of just syntax, like here we make a new variable, talking a little bit about these functions, and accessing a property of one of these, an object, and calling a function on that object, and sending it some data that we have. And that's pretty much the simplest thing you can do. In the next lesson, we will probably do something like moving the object forward, backward, that kind of stuff, by pressing certain buttons and that kind of thing. Alright, that's it. Hope you enjoy it.